This is one of the most complex builds in 3.25, with multiple exclusive synergies. One missing piece will cause the whole tower to fall, aka go to the void. In summary, at an absolute minimum configurations, we have 32 million poison DPS, and for defenses, an average of 114k Vis max hit, and a spell max fire hit of 2.3 million. This build is tailored specifically for Void Valdos, and many QLs suited for general gameplay have been sacrificed. Removing vanity items and putting back the power just 5%, the items in this build can be obtained for 3 to 4 mirrors as opposed to the 10 plus showcased. That being said, there is no issue to converting this build back into general gameplay, as I've had success doing Titanic Pandemonium farming in rarity gear. This time I've chosen to present this build in a documentary style as opposed to previously, to help clearly explain each mechanic and decision one by one without overloading information jargon. Please enjoy. The first defensive layer added to this build is Spell Suppression. Trickster synergizes greatly with Suppression with the Spellbreaker notable, and has other lingering synergies with its other Ascendancy notables. Together with Innovate and the Spell Suppression Mastery, we can maintain a 56% damage reduction against spells at all times, increased to 66% while at full energy shield. However, due to the nature of the fight, the configuration is never set to full. The core to the name of the build is Kongming's Strategem, which provides a 30% spell damage reduction against blind enemies. The shield is used in combination with Born in the Shadows, stolen from Saboteur with the Forbidden Flesh and Flame Jewel. Together, they provide an additional 45% damage reduction against spells, and 15% damage reduction against all damage types. Path of Building calculates this additively, and it would be 39.5% if it was more duplicative. The application of Blind is guaranteed to nearby enemies, meaning if Shaper or Elder slams, they are always considered blinded. For all targets further away, multiple cast stun setups allow for massive hit counts across the screen. Awakening Central Core and Sion's Ambition combine together for a near full screen strike range, which in tandem with everything else provides almost guaranteed blind for all enemies. Adorned has been greatly nerfed this league, capping out at 100% increased effectiveness. However, Adorned still provides great value when maximizing one prefix and one suffix specifically on a jewel. The magic jewels are now treated with the same effectiveness value of a rare jewel, 2 prefixes and 2 suffixes, but condensed into a single affix that we desire. Defensively, this means that the only prefix on our jewels that we care about is 8% energy shield, increased to 16%. In other words, our magic jewels will now be a rare jewel with 8% energy shield twice on the prefixes. Suffixes are treated with the same regard, and we dedicate most of our suffixes to damage. However, we still have a few jewels that give us a full 16 times 2 intelligence and 2 times 2 for 4% max resistances. In addition, implicits of magic jewels recover any lost value from Adorned itself, which gives no stats. Our jewels are maximized within reason for 5% intelligence synthesis wherever possible, and double corruptions for the rest. Energy shield is the lifeblood of our character. Outside of any defensive layering, increasing our energy shield will always be the most reliable source of maximum hit. In 3.25, the new quality changes and the addition of necrotic armor and other base types have provided energy shield values never seen before. Together with Escape Artists, we achieve a very healthy 20k energy shield, going down to 24.9k in 10% less partner maps. As previously mentioned with Adorned, base energy shield multiplies well with 16% ES jewels. Other sources of energy shield come from a level 23 discipline, and the benefits from intelligence as a semi-stacking character. Energy shield recharge is a mostly reliable source of recovery in battle maps. This is triggered by our Spellbreaker notable, which provides instantaneous start or recharge at a 50% rate when suppressing spell damage. Together with Wicked Ward, this recharge is uninterrupted for the next 4 seconds, which in almost all cases means going to full ES. Wicked Ward comes with a 40% less recharge rate downside, which is alleviated through 30% increased recharge rate from Discipline and 10% increase from Trickster. Unnatural Calm is a potential source of recharge rate that I've both considered and previously assigned points to. This build achieves 90% or max res with the use of Mage Blade Abuse through triple elemental flasks to raise our base 75 to 84% max res. In addition, 2% or max res is gained from the Searing Exarch exclusive implicit on the chest armor, increasing it to 86%. Pure Device and Pure Lightning both give their respective 4% max res, and a duel with 2% max fire res suffix, new to 2.35, is doubled by Adorned to 4%, to give us a full 90% to all max resistances. A Business Flask and 20% elemental resistance flask suffix finalizes our Mage Blade Abuse to overcap elemental resistances. It is important to note that a higher overcap on elemental resistances is necessary, due to the risky nature of both elemental exposure and reduced fast effectiveness found on Delirious maps. With resistances sorted by Mage Blood, we have alleviated the pressure on our suffixes. As a result, we can easily obtain intelligence on every piece of gear. This effective scaling enables the Eater of the World's % less damage taken per int implicit to provide another layer of damage reduction. The Natural Intelligence attribute also provides great benefits to both energy shield and mana, further improving our defenses. Stationary is a status in Path of Exile which requires your character to not move. It is important to note that standing still is not the same as not moving. Effects that knock back your character will break the stationary condition. Frostblink is an instantaneous teleport which helps maintain stationary status for all intents and purposes. However, it is worth noting that Soul of Tokuhama stacking PDR is broken, which may indicate that changing position coordinates in PoE counts as moving. Arctic Armour is the first buff that benefits from being stationary, providing a 21% less physical and a 20% less fire damage taken buff. This complements the strategy world, as those two are the most dangerous damage types in the field. The Essence of Horror modifier found in boots provide an additional 5% reduced elemental damage taken while stationary. In addition, there is a bonus synergy with Sigil Power. In battle maps, sources of non-permanent charges can be considered completely unreliable. This can be mostly attributed to Thieves' Grip. In fact, using temporary power or frenzy charges is considered detrimental, as bosses will steal them and gain bonus effective stats against you. With 3.25, Reflecting Mists have allowed an easier source of permanent endurance charges from accessories. My build utilizes 3 min charges with the Helical Ring. An observation that I noticed is that Thieves' Grip doesn't seem to be able to steal minimum charges. Critical reduction is very important, as it is a multiplier for enemy damage, and it was a great topic of concern for me. There were 2 initial plans for critical mitigation that eventually fell through. The first one is Poison Mastery. As a poison build, we have access to the Mastery. Enemies poisoned by you cannot inflict critical strikes. In tandem with full screen coverage and 100% chance to poison, this means that every monster is essentially permanently poisoned and thus cannot inflict critical strikes. However, in late 3.23, I realized something towards the end of my Valdo grind at the time, and that was when poisoned enemies move outside the 2 meter radius range for Valdo maps, they immediately lose their poison status effects. Even if you replay a poison when they are outside the 2 meter radius, they still do not have the effect of being poisoned. I believe this is due to the way that the poison is coded, where it requires damage to be greater than 0. Without confirmation, this was too risky of a choice to use. I had also considered the critical reduction per endurance charge craft on the chest armor suffix, ignoring the ultra expensive crafting costs. Replacing a 55 int node with a 30% crit reduction pretty much gave the same value as a tattoo. In addition, when I take my ring off for 10% less damage maps, I lose this critical reduction. And as a result, this had to be ruled out. The Curse Mastery provides a 40% reduced critical damage for just 1 point, and was very tempting. However, the reliability just wasn't enough. In the case that the curse would drop off, this would cause me to lose both curse and critical reduction, and this doubled down on a defensive gap for this scenario. The goal is to spread defensive gaps across as many different sources as possible, similar to the Swiss cheese model. As such, the final critical reduction sources come from Sanctuary of Thought for 30%, Armour and Neediness Mastery for 20%, Shield Corruption for 25%, and the remaining 25% from Intelligence Tattoos. Damage shifting has become more readily available in 3.25 with the introduction of the new Watch Side modifiers for specific purities. In Path of Exile, Elemental Penetration can only penetrate the resistance it's targeting. That is, its 3 Flame Blast 10% Fire Pen can only pen 10% Fire Res. By shifting 20% of the incoming fire as lightning or cold, it essentially increases the maximum fire res for that portion to 90%. Further sources of damage shifting are available, such as Sublime Vision, Glorious Vanity, Zabakwa, Divine Flesh, Temper War, and other uniques, most notably Forth of Thunder. However, as the fight is more than just a theory, it made more logical sense to maintain the current configuration with Kongming Stratagem. There are 4 extremely dangerous elements that we must prevent when fighting Ghost of Fear. Shock and Ignite are the only 2 elemental elements of concern, and are dealt with a flask suffix for shock and crafted dual implicits for reducing ignite duration. With the nerf to Adorned in this league, you will need 2 perfect 25% rolls on duels to reach 100% reduced ignite duration, but lower rolls can be supplemented by replacing a strength attribute node with the reduced ignite duration. In fact, reducing strength only helps this build, as it removes maximum life as well. Bleed and CB are 2 physical elements that must be addressed. Immunities to both can be obtained from a single flask suffix, but good dual corruptions can also give immunities too. Instant recovery is by far the most important aspect of this build. Embezzler's Touch and Grip will cause your recovery rates of life, mana, and energy shield to become 0. This disables any recovery that has a duration component, as the rate is now 0. The only solution are types of recovery that do not have time components. For life, this includes items such as Defiance of Destiny, which gains you life, Blood Notch, which instantly recovers your life, and other sources of instant leech. For this build, Ghost Dance is used to occasionally gain ES when hit. Leech Mastery, 10% of Leech is instant, is paired with Trickster's Soul Drinker to gain instant Leech to energy shield from Mortal Strike damage. And finally, the piece that solves the puzzle is Watcher's Eye Discipline, gain 20 to 30 ES per enemy hit while affected by Discipline. This modifier alone was the sole reason I decided against any Sublime Visions, despite how powerful full damage shift is in 3.25. By using this modifier, with casting stun triggers and huge hit counts from Mortal Strike, we can instantly recover thousands of ES per second through the Embezzler debuff. One step ahead is the Trickster Notable that provides a minimum of 108% action speed for Trickster, which boosts attack rate and thus instant ES recovery as well. In addition, Petrification is commonly found on Valdo modifiers, and this is completely ignored by Ascendancy. One step ahead also makes it that nearby enemies have less action speed, which reduces the overall incoming damage to minimize enemy burst potential. The primary curse utilized is Enfeeble. Enfeeble reduces the damage dealt by enemies, including bosses. Enfeeble is further augmented by the additional 19% from the perfect Eldritch implicit found on the helmet. 5% curse effectiveness is also picked up by pathing to Whisper of Doom, which grants our second curse, Temporal Chains. There is a discussion here regarding Punishment versus Temporal Chains. Punishment allows bosses to become debilitated, thus dealing 10% less damage, and taking increased damage while under half HP. Temporal Chains reduces the boss's action speed by another 21%, giving us 29% reduced action speed together with 1 step ahead. Temporal Chains also increases the duration of other debuffs, thus increasing poison damage by multiplying the duration of each poison. This also helps in feeble uptime by extending the curse duration to over 20 seconds. As such, I've chosen to utilize Temporal Chains, as even though the maximum hit is lower, the potential incoming burst damage is lowered. As for enemy curses, this is easily dealt with through the Mage Foot abuse of a fast suffix, but dual implicits may be used too. Our only source of physical damage taken as is from the unique presence 9% phys taken as chaos on the helmet. Due to the nature of the fight, there is always a unique monster within presence range. I have been heavily considering a phys taken as chest implicit, as currently the most dangerous hit from any enemy is a 100% delirious Shepherd Slam, which takes about half my HP. Fortify is a minor defensive layer that is semi-reliable. Fortify is gained with a low % chance from the weapon corruption implicits. During most fights, the stacks can fluctuate between 0 and 20, and it's not a layer that I specifically rely on. However, it does help. The Armour and Energy Shield Mastery recover 5% of maximum ES over 1 second when hit by physical damage, is something that we allocate. Now, it's very important to note that currently, people normally use this in tandem with the ring. Mist Reflection adds physical damage to a tax against you. However, through my testing, we have discovered that this is in fact redundant or even bad. So the reason is, looking through PODB, we can see that monster attacks all come with base physical damage. And for monsters or bosses that have elemental, they are actually converted from physical. And most things don't full convert, but we tested full conversion as well. So I used a full conversion Ice Crash into an enemy who had the ring on, and we realized that through full conversion, you still do not proc the physical regeneration. This means that we don't need the phys damage to attacks against you on a ring. One of the most lethal sources of damage in PoE is exploding enemy corpses. We utilize a Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction to quickly detonate all corpses. Void Spheres is also a worthy consideration. The final piece that ties the puzzle together is hit count, and the most important part lies in the skill gems and gem supports. Molten Strike is a skill that enables Fortify on hits and has many projectiles sprouting after initial hits. By using Awaken Greater Mobile Projectiles, we can raise the number of projectiles to 9. Then, we can abuse these projectiles with returning projectile supports, giving approximately double the hits, ignoring area overlaps. We can again abuse the strike component of the skill by using the Eldritch Glove Implicit for 2 additional strikes, and Awaken Essential Core for another 3 additional strikes. Combined with Sion's Ambition, the new Anoint this league, the bonus range gained from Essential Core, together we can full screen strike 6 targets, each generating 9 projectiles, which can return for an approximate 120 hits or more. Finally, this abuse is amplified to the extreme with the Awakened Multi-Strike support and a Poison Berry Tincture of Mastery for more attack speed. For a single target, we use a gem swap to remove Ancestral Core so we can focus on just one enemy. Now let's move on to utility. How can we sustain these shenanigans? Once again, we identify that we are in a situation where we take massive incoming damage, and for 1 point, we can take 10% of damage taken, recoup this mana. This point gives us a very extended sustain on the Poison Berry Tincture during combat. In addition, this also fuels the mana spent by custom stunned, which again fuels the mana used by Sigil of Power. In addition, the new cluster Thrill of Battle reduces attack costs while providing mana hits, and is combined with Clever Thief and the Instant Lich Mastery to instantaneously recover mana used for attacks. When Cast when Stunned is used with CI, we can use Immutable Force rather than becoming stun immune to help us set up the Cast when Stuns to further scrape with spells. And this is powered by enemy damage recouped as mana for us. 22% reservation efficiency is cheated onto the build with Adorned through corruptions on the jewels. In conclusion, this build maximizes the strengths and minimizes the weaknesses of Trickster to an extreme. While I do not expect to see Trickster remain this powerful in future leagues, this video should serve as a documentary on the defensive mechanics in 3.25. As for my opinion on this build, in comparison to my 3.23 Affliction Pathfinder, I believe that my 3.25 Trickster does not even come close to my Pathfinder. The damage output by Pathfinder was at least 10 times the Trickster, and the hit immunity style defense of Pathfinder made it literally immortal. I would like to thank the viewers from Twitch who contributed to this build. For full disclosure, I have contributed myself over 5 mirrors of my own currency to this build, followed by 5 mirrors or more, and more from the stream. The stipulation I promised is that I will take this build and all the contributed currency to the Void. While I won't intentionally die to Void maps, I will keep investing, researching, and reiterating upon this and other ideas while pushing the limits until I eventually do die. Keep in mind that this is probably the 5th or 6th iteration of this build, and a lot of currency is consumed through the testing different performance solutions. If you like this style of presentation, please let me know. Compared to my previous videos, the time and effort required was at least 20 times or more. And as always, thank you for watching.